Welcome to the Classical Architecture Workshop. My name is Professor Brandon Rowe, and today we are going to be learning about the Corinthian order. More specifically, our lesson will be looking at how we can draw the block order for this Corinthian order. But before we begin, a couple things to note. We are going to be using the American Vignola, a guide to the making of classical architecture by William Ware. As we look at the 5 classical orders, specifically this parallel of the orders according to William Ware's interpretation of Vignola. One thing you'll note about the Corinthian order, unlike the previous 3 orders, the Tuscan, Doric, and Ionic, is that it builds off of them. First, you'll note the Ionic, its volutes. The Corinthian builds upon that, but the other thing that will be most obvious to many of you is the column capital itself increases in size. This is one of the 3 things that William Ware points out, is this bell-shaped capital. A couple of other things to note is beyond this bell-shaped capital, there are a series of small brackets which are called modillions. These modillions support the cornice instead of the mutuals found in the Doric order. But in terms of ornamentation, the Corinthian order does go up a notch by adding what are called acanthus leaves. These acanthus leaves are applied to that bell-shaped capital, as well as to, in some instances, the sides of the modillions themselves. These are kind of those 3 main overarching characteristics of the Corinthian order, according to William Ware. So with that, we're going to draw this entire order in a simplistic version, which we call the block order. So let's get started. To get started drawing the block order, this is what we're going to be producing. What you'll note, as with all of the classical orders, is that it's divided, the whole order is divided into 5 parts. 4 for the column height and 1 for the entablature. So here, this graphic scale here on the side, that is what we're going to be doing. In general, as before, all of the columns 1/3 up is where our entasis starts, and the entasis, right, as we recall, is where the column starts tapering in. So in perspective, it has a sense that it is bulging. The entablature, just as we've looked at in the past, is divided into 3 parts: the cornice, the frieze, and the architrave, and we'll be subdividing those accordingly. The one thing to note is that the Corinthian block, or the Corinthian order in general, unlike the other ones, it gets more slender. And it does that by the diameter of the column, how many diameters tall it is. And for this instance, our Corinthian block order, we've got it at 10D tall, or 10 diameters tall. So the drawing that we're going to be producing, you're going to need a couple of things. One, either a square or a rolling ruler, a triangle. You're going to need an architect's scale. You'll also need a mechanical pencil or pen as we go through this process. And I should remind you that this column, we're assuming that D diameter is actually 1 foot. So if we're drawing this to scale, we are going to draw it at 1/2 inch scale, meaning a 1/2 inch equals 1 foot. So you can see here that I've got my 1/2 inch scale, half inch equals a foot. And so if this is 10D tall, right, if I'm measuring it, it should be 10 feet in height. And then the entablature is 2.5 feet in height. So with that, let's get started. So first off, what you're going to be doing is I would go ahead and get yourself situated. I would draw a line here on the bottom. And we're going to draw a vertical line on the side there. And once I've got those two lines, the next step that I'm going to take here is I'm going to create a graphic scale on the side. But before I do that, I need to find my overall height. So as we recall from that previous drawing, if we're dividing this entire drawing into 5 parts, to get the overall height, I'm going to divide that by D. And what I come up with is that 1.25 inches, I will have 5 of those. So my total height is 6.25 inches if I'm drawing this to scale. So if I put my ruler here, I'm just going to mark that 6.25. I'm going to draw a little graphic scale here on the side. Make sure you can still see that. So every 1.25 inches, I'm going to put a tick mark here. And that should be my 5 parts that I'm looking at. After I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and actually strike a line here on the top across for the top of my entablature. And I'm going to take that over roughly 5 inches. Maybe a little bit beyond that. Next, I'm going to create a center line for this column. And that center line, I'm going to put over 4 inches from the, that graphic scale on the side. And since this is my center line, I'm going to do a line, a small dash, a line, small dash, a line, small dash, to be able to convey that. And I'm going to take that below that baseline at the bottom there. Okay, there we go. So the next critical step is after I've got this subdivided into 5 parts, I'm going to go ahead and create another graphic scale right next door to that other one. Just going to strike a line, vertical line that goes all the way to the top there. Another one just parallel to that. And if I'm looking at my ruler, I'm going to go up 5 inches. Because remember, the column height is 10D, 10 diameters. And if one diameter is every half inch, I'm going to do the math, and I'm going to go up to 5 there. And then down from there, I'm going to, every half inch, I'm going to create a tick mark there. So half an inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2 inches, 2.5 inch, 3, etc. until I get all the way up to 5 again. There we go. So before I go any further, I'm going to strike a line from that 5 where I created that across for my entablature. I'm going to take it just a little bit beyond that center line of the column. Okay, so now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and write my 5 parts here. And then my column, I'm going to label that as 10D. D is in dog. All right, and then my entablature, we need to subdivide this entablature, this distance, into 10 parts. Just going to write that there so I remember. But the entablature compared to the column is actually 2.5D. I'll write that there. Okay. So for all of you math whizzes, to get 10 parts, I just have my typical ruler here. My ruler is subdivided into every 1/8 inch, there's a tick mark. So if I put it there and if I've drawn it correctly, I should automatically have every 1/8 inch, I can go ahead and put a tick mark. That will give me my 10 divisions for my entablature. Okay, so now that we've got that set up, we can go ahead and subdivide our entablature into the various 3 parts, the architrave, the frieze, and the cornice, as we're doing this block order. So if I go up 3, right there, make sure I've got this squared off correctly. Strike a line across. I'm just going to take that just barely past the center line. Then I'm going to go up 3 again. Strike a horizontal line. Same thing. So now I've got my architrave. Starting at the bottom, and that is 3/4 D. My frieze, which is also 3/4 D, and then I've got my cornice, which is actually 1D. So already we've got a good majority of our block order underway. Go ahead and erase part of this. A little bit past there. So for this next part, I'm going to need my scale, my architectural scale, and I'm going to go to the one that is 1 inch. My 1 inch scale equals a foot. This is going to help me lay out the bottom here. So as I'm laying out the bottom, what I want to create is a little graphic scale here on the bottom. I'm going to subdivide D into 6 components, 6 parts. So if I'm using my 1-inch scale, half an inch actually is, or on the 1-inch scale, half inch actually is subdivided nicely into 6 components. So I'm going to draw a small little graphic scale as I put the 3, line that up with my center line, strike that across, and then I'm going to, every 1 inch on this, what represents 1 inch, I'll draw a line there. And so if I want to check that, that should equal half an inch. I put my ruler there, it does. That is my D. So I'm going to pull down a little dimension stringer off of that. I can erase this center part just a little bit. And I'm going to put 6, because there's 6 subdivisions there. And I'm going to put 1D, just to help differentiate that for me. Okay, so before we start drawing the column itself, there's one thing that we need to do, and that is we need to set up the 1/3, 2/3 for the entasis for the column. So to divide this whole thing into 3 equal divisions, there's not really a good mathematical equation when you're subdividing this, unfortunately. So if I was to use my 1-inch scale here and do my diagonal rule, so if I line up my 0 and my 6 here with the bottom of the entablature, I can strike a diagonal line here very lightly. And every 2, because I need a number divisible by 3, every 2 inches I'm going to put a little tick mark here. So 2, 4, and that will be able to subdivide that entire column into the third, as I was working with before. So I'm going to go ahead and strike a line across here for that third. I'm going to take it over to the right-hand side, because we're going to create another little graphic scale to the side here for that shows that entasis. Okay. And I'm also going to take that other line over for the top third. And same with the bottom of the entablature. Make sure that is lined up. There we go. Okay, so that's critical. So just going back to what we're drawing here, we've got our third height. So we just created that graphic scale here on the side. So let's go ahead and label that. We'll put that at 1/3 the column height. Or which is 3 1/3 D. Put that in parentheses there. So if you wanted to kind of do a spot check on this, more or less, this is going to be 1 5/8 of an inch. More or less, you should have a line there. Okay, now let's start drawing our column. So let's put our T-square there, or a triangle. Let's go up a vertical line until we hit that 1/3 mark. And something went wrong there. It's a little crooked. Scoot this back. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Let's check it. Should be our 1/2 inch. There we go. Okay, so once we've got that, now we're going to go up to the top. And right, when we're thinking about entasis, right, there's a tapering of the column as it goes up. In all of these, it's 5/6D. So if we're using our 1-inch scale again, and I line up this area at 2.5 inches. I'm going to strike a little marker there for me. So strike a line at 5 and have 2.5 be right there in the center. That's going to give me my 5/6D. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to do a dashed line all the way down to the bottom. Line that up with the bottom, the base. I'm going to do the same for the right-hand side. Make sure that's square. Okay, should look something kind of like that. All right, so next what we need to draw is, now that we've got that 5/6D, we're going to go ahead and measure the capital. So the top, the bell shape, as it flares out at the very top, there with the abacus, we are going to be drawing that at 9/6D. We're going to use our 1-inch scale to determine that once again. And then the overall height of the column capital is 7/6D. So we're going to go ahead and measure that. So if I've got my 1-inch scale as before, for that top, since we're doing the 9/6D, so we should be going over 4.5. Let's put a little tick mark there, and 9 on the opposite side. And then going down from the bottom of the entablature, we're going to make that a 7. Is it 7/6? Okay. And right there, that is the base of the capital. So I'm going to do a diagonal line that takes that to the top, to where that 9/6 is. on both sides there. And then from the bottom of the capital, I'm going to take that all the way back down to where my column starts to do the entasis. Just a diagonal line there on both sides. There we go. Now I've got that all marked. Go ahead and strike a little dimension line here. And for that column capital, I'm going to put 7/6 D, and I'm going to call that the capital. I'm going to put another dimension stringer here for my 5/6 D. And then I'm also going to put one here for the top of the capital. I'm going to label that 9/6 D. All right. For the base, the column base, it is half D. So over here on the side, we've already got 1 D noted. So if I take my 1/2 inch scale here, and I put a little graphic scale right next to that other one, and I subdivide that in half. And if I take that line across, do it this way, just going to put half D here. This is my base. I'll label this here. This is the shaft area of the column. So that base is half D, and my shaft is 8 1/3 D. 7/6 D for the capital. That equals my 10 D all the way up. All right, we're just about done. Now we just need to finish off the entablature. So from this 5/6 line that we dashed in all the way from the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and continue a straight line up from that, from the bottom of the entablature. And I'm going to take that to the bottom of the cornice. Right there. And above that, I'm just going to continue that dashed line. That's my center line. And from there, we're going to do a 45-degree angle. Or if you want to double check, it should be 1 D across. So if I'm using my 1/2 inch, put a tick mark there, and strike a 45-degree angle. Connecting those two, do a little dimension stringer there. Call that 1 D. And I'll put a little angle here as 45 degrees. Make sure those are all touching. And there we go. That is our simplified order. So if we were to thicken up some of those lines, just so it stands out a little bit more. Oops. I'm just going to kind of freehand this. So I've got my general outline there. Do this first for the column. Column capital. As it flares out, it jogs in, goes straight up, jogs out the 45 degrees. We'll do that top of the entablature. The bottom of the entablature. It comes over the capital, and we'll also do the base here. There we go. Now you're well on your way. Thank you again for joining us, and stay tuned for next time.